The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. In a place where power is measured not by strength, but by survival, one man discovered the ultimate weapon: food. In a world stripped of comfort, a single hot meal could mean protection, loyalty, even life itself. Inside the walls of a maximum security prison, he turned the kitchen into a kingdom. Every pot, every plate, every bite was a piece in a dangerous game of influence, fear, and control. They called him the prison chef, and for those who crave more than just food, he held the key to power. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. The kitchen becomes a kingdom. The prison smelled of metal, sweat, and desperation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering as if mirroring the anxiety of the men trapped within the cold concrete walls. For most, a meal was just a meal: a half-cooked slab of mystery meat, a cold tray of beans, a slice of bread. But for him, it was an opportunity. He was new to the block, yet something about his calm precision, the way he handled the scraps of commissary food, drew attention. At first, the other inmates watched quietly. A can of beans, a packet of ramen, a few shreds of processed cheese. He turned these meager rations into something others craved. It wasn't magic. It was skill, patience, and observation. He studied the man, noted who was desperate, who had influence, who feared confrontation, and he fed them accordingly. Food, in prison, was more than nutrition. It was currency. A meal could save you from a beating, earn you loyalty, or grant temporary reprieve from the chaos of the yard. The prison chef understood this better than anyone. He didn't just cook. He negotiated, manipulated, and strategized through food. One extra helping of rice, a slice of melted cheese on a packet of ramen. Suddenly he had favors, alliances, and respect. Word spread quickly. Inmates began pooling their commissary items: cans, pasta, cheese, hoping to earn his attention. He accepted, carefully, selectively. Not everyone got equal treatment. Those who displeased him got scraps. Those who aligned with him got warmth, sustenance, even protection. Within weeks, the cafeteria table, once a place of mundane survival, had become a hub of influence. The guards noticed subtle changes. The inmates were quieter in the dining hall, waiting patiently for his distribution. No open rebellion, no shoving, just an unspoken acknowledgement of authority. Yet the prison chef remained invisible to most officers. He wore no uniform, bore no formal title, yet he was more powerful than many who patrolled the halls. His rise was meticulous. He learned the schedules, the weaknesses, and the moods of both prisoners and guards. He discovered which men could be persuaded with extra portions, and which could be intimidated with the absence of flavor. A simple packet of seasoning became a tool, a symbol of influence. Soon, the kitchen itself became his throne. Improvised hot plates, scavenged utensils, and makeshift cookware allowed him to prepare meals that were sought after. Even hardened gang members, tattooed across their arms and necks, came to respect the chef, if not fear him. By the end of his first month, the prison chef had established a network. Men who had once fought for scraps now followed his lead. They carried messages, settled minor disputes, and even alerted him to potential threats, all in exchange for the privilege of a decent meal. Power in the prison didn't always come from fists or weapons. Sometimes it came from a carefully prepared bowl of noodles. But with power came risk. Rival factions eyed his influence with suspicion. Men who saw themselves as natural leaders tested him. A wrong word, a poorly timed gesture, or the wrong portion could lead to violent confrontation. And yet, he moved through these challenges with the precision of a strategist. He observed, adapted, and acted decisively when necessary. One slip of a tray, one poorly timed distribution, and alliances could crumble, but he rarely erred. The prison chef's influence extended beyond the kitchen. Inmates whispered about him in the yards, in the cells, and even in the showers. He was the man who could make or break a day with a single plate. Respect turned into loyalty, loyalty into protection, and protection into fear, the kind that is both admired and dreaded. For many, survival meant keeping one's head down. For others, survival meant forging alliances. But for the chef, survival was mastery. Every spice, every carefully portioned meal, was a move in a silent game of power. The kitchen was no longer a room. It was a command center, a place where influence was minted and reputations were built or destroyed. By the time the first month ended, even the guards had noticed the subtle shift in control. A hardened inmate with gangster tattoos leaned back, surveying the dining hall quietly. His meal was hot, perfectly prepared, but his respect for the chef was palpable. In a world ruled by fear, he had found a leader who wielded knives and forks instead of clubs and chains, and for the first time in months, the block felt a strange, tense order. The prison chef's journey had only begun. Yet in that small, dimly lit kitchen, amidst the smell of boiling beans and fried noodles, a legend was quietly being forged, one meal at a time. Alliances and power plays. The prison chef's reputation had spread like wildfire through the block. Where whispers of his culinary skill once drew curious glances, now they demanded attention. Inmates who had scoffed at him in the beginning now moved with caution, calculating every step. The kitchen was no longer just a place to prepare meals. It was the center of influence, a chessboard where every tray and morsel became a move toward power. He had learned that food was not only a tool for influence but also a way to navigate the complex and often dangerous hierarchies inside the prison. The yard was a battlefield, filled with hardened men marked by gangster tattoos, each representing a faction, a story, a warning. Here, a hot meal could calm tempers, form alliances, or even manipulate loyalty. He recognized the value of patience. A well-timed plate could prevent a fight, earn information, or secure protection. Soon, the chef began identifying key players. One was a tall inmate with intricate tattoos crawling up his neck and hands, a man known for orchestrating intimidation campaigns in the yard. Another, shorter but stocky, had scars across his face from past conflicts. He ran small hustles and controlled contraband distribution. Both men were powerful in their own rights, but both understood the value of a good meal. The chef approached carefully, offering small portions of his creations, carefully observing reactions, noting weaknesses, desires, and unspoken agreements. These first interactions were subtle yet strategic. A few extra bites of seasoned rice here, a packet of ramen with a slice of cheese there. Each gesture sent messages. The tall tattooed man, after receiving an unexpectedly hearty meal, nodded in acknowledgement, a silent promise of neutrality. The scar-faced inmate accepted his offering with a guarded smile, signaling cautious cooperation. Slowly, the chef began weaving a web of loyalty that spanned factions, giving him unprecedented reach across the block. But alliances were fragile. A misplaced portion, a perceived slight, or the favoritism of another inmate could ignite tension. The chef learned quickly to read body language, tone, and subtle cues that indicated brewing trouble. He became adept at using food as both reward and deterrent, balancing generosity with control. Even men who were violent or impulsive realized that crossing him would leave them with cold, unappealing meals, a subtle but potent warning. Within weeks, the prison chef's influence reached beyond the kitchen. Inmates began seeking him out for advice, guidance, or intervention in disputes. Minor conflicts, arguments over bunk space, contraband, or favors, were quietly mediated over a plate of improvised noodles. His growing authority meant that he could settle minor disputes before they escalated into violence. Men respected him not only for his culinary skill but for his strategic mind, his ability to navigate the unspoken codes of survival. But power came at a cost. Rival factions noticed the shift in the balance of influence. Some began to test the chef, challenging his decisions, questioning his methods, or attempting to undermine his authority. One night, a small group of men ambushed him in the kitchen, demanding more than their usual share of a hot meal. The chef remained calm, distributing portions with measured precision, ensuring the instigators received just enough to prevent immediate retaliation but not enough to feel entitled. The tension was palpable, but he diffused the situation without physical conflict, a victory that solidified his reputation. Word of his cunning and influence reached the ears of other inmates who had been indifferent to the chef before. Men who controlled small corners of power now sought alignment, understanding that the chef's kitchen was not just a place of sustenance, but a seat of authority. Some even risked their pride to request favors, subtle acknowledgments of the chef's growing dominance. The delicate network he had built became a force that could control not just meals but morale, loyalty, and even the behavior of the block. The chef's methods were meticulous. He documented in his mind every interaction, every slight, every favor. Nothing was left to chance. He learned who could be persuaded with kindness, who could be intimidated with scarcity, and who needed a combination of both. Meals were no longer merely about flavor. They were messages. A plate of well-cooked beans and rice could communicate loyalty, respect, or warning. Even those who did not directly interact with him understood the implicit power of his decisions, the invisible lines of influence stretching from the kitchen throughout the prison. The balance of power was delicate. The chef knew that any disruption could trigger chaos. Guards, unaware of the intricate web, continued their rounds, while he maintained his position quietly but deliberately. Every decision carried weight. A gesture of generosity could prevent a fight, while a small denial could remind men of their place. In this high-stakes environment, the prison chef was a master tactician, using food as both sword and shield. By the end of his second month, the chef's name had become a quiet legend. Even the most hardened inmates with gang tattoos acknowledged his authority. The kitchen was no longer just a room. It was a command center, a place where influence was carefully measured and executed. His careful cultivation of alliances and power plays had given him a level of control that few could challenge. Survival, respect, and dominance in the block were now intertwined with the meals he prepared. The chef's rise did not go unnoticed. While most inmates respected his authority, there were always those who watched, waiting for an opportunity to challenge or exploit him. The tension between loyalty and ambition, fear and admiration, became a constant undercurrent. And yet, the prison chef remained focused, disciplined, and strategic, understanding that in this world, patience and precision were more powerful than brute force. Every plate served, every portion measured, and every interaction orchestrated added to the legend. In a place where survival often meant violence, where power was marked in scars and tattoos, the prison chef had carved a path using something far more subtle: food. And in doing so, he had begun to rewrite the rules of influence and control within the block, one meal at a time. Conflict and rivalry escalate. By the third month, the prison chef's influence was undeniable. Inmates whispered his name with a mixture of respect and caution. Even the most hardened men, their arms inked with gangster tattoos and faces marked by scars, understood the unspoken hierarchy he had created. But where power grows, envy and rivalry follow, and the chef was about to face his first serious test. The yard had become a place of silent tension. Rival factions, who had long controlled the flow of contraband, began to perceive him as a threat. His kitchen had become more than a hub for sustenance. It was a nerve center of influence. One wrong move could ignite open conflict. And, in a prison where alliances shifted like sand, even the smallest perceived slight could be deadly. It began with subtle provocations. An extra portion withheld, a whispered rumor about the chef's favoritism, or a slight misstep in a meal's preparation. The scar-faced inmate who had once accepted the chef's meals with caution now began to push back, questioning his authority and distributing portions of his own in the yard. Tensions rose. Murmurs of dissent spread quickly, and soon the chef realized he was no longer operating in a vacuum. The first confrontation erupted during a late-night kitchen session. A group of inmates, fueled by anger and pride, cornered the chef, demanding a larger share of the improvised meals. They were men with reputations, tattoos crawling across their arms and necks like maps of violence. The kitchen, once a sanctuary, became a battleground. But the chef remained calm, his eyes scanning the room, noting positions, body language, and potential allies. With precise words, measured gestures, and the strategic distribution of hot food, he diffused the immediate threat. Yet the encounter left a mark. He now understood the depth of challenge he faced. Conflict wasn't only physical. Psychological warfare became the new battleground. Rival inmates began spreading rumors, questioning his loyalty to certain factions, and attempting to undermine his influence. The chef had to be vigilant. Every meal prepared, every interaction, every distribution was carefully monitored. One misstep could unravel months of careful control. He began to adjust, creating subtle systems, coded signals, discreet favors, and selective generosity to maintain loyalty and detect deception. Amid the tension, alliances shifted. Some inmates who had once been skeptical recognized the strategic mind behind the meals. They began to support him, offering protection in exchange for continued favor. Others tried to manipulate him, bringing gifts or commissary items in hopes of buying influence. The chef learned to balance reward and deterrent, ensuring that loyalty was earned, not coerced. The kitchen had become a chessboard, and he was the grandmaster. Escalation took a darker turn when a rival faction attempted to sabotage a meal. They substituted spoiled ingredients, hoping to tarnish his reputation and provoke a fight. But the chef had anticipated such moves. He inspected every item with meticulous care, turning potential disaster into opportunity. The incident became a lesson for the others. Tampering with his food was dangerous. Respect turned into fear, loyalty solidified, and his control over the block grew stronger. Through these trials, the chef's legend expanded. Inmates referred to him quietly by nickname, acknowledging his strategic genius. Newcomers were quickly educated on the informal rules he had established. A plate of hot noodles was no longer merely sustenance. It was a symbol of order, power, and respect. Missteps could result in cold portions, withheld meals, or subtle retribution. Consequences that were far more effective than overt violence. The chef also began observing patterns beyond the kitchen. He learned which inmates were likely to spark trouble, who could be persuaded with words, and who would respond only to subtle threats. By mapping these dynamics, he created an intricate network of influence that extended throughout the block. Men who once ruled through intimidation now deferred, quietly acknowledging the authority of someone whose power came not from fists or weapons, but from meals. Yet, danger remained ever present. Rival factions were relentless, probing for weaknesses, testing alliances, and looking for opportunities to challenge the chef's dominance. One particularly tense day, a heavily tattooed inmate with a reputation for violence deliberately placed himself at the edge of the kitchen, his presence a warning. The chef responded not with aggression, but with strategy, distributing portions that subtly rewarded loyalty while signaling boundaries. He understood that survival in this environment required more than courage. It required precision, foresight, and psychological mastery. The balance of power became a daily negotiation. Every meal prepared, every favor granted, every slight withheld was calculated to maintain control. The chef had become a master of perception. Inmates knew that the kitchen was not merely about feeding the hungry, but about maintaining a delicate equilibrium in a volatile environment. One misstep could provoke violence, yet he navigated these waters with skill, establishing a reputation as both feared and respected. By the end of the third month, the prison chef had transformed the block. His influence extended beyond the kitchen, shaping behavior, mediating disputes, and controlling access to one of the most valuable commodities in prison, food. Rival factions had been tested, alliances forged, and the social order subtly reshaped. The chef had survived his first major conflict, emerging stronger and more strategic than ever. But he knew that power was never absolute. Threats lurked in every shadow, and alliances were fragile. The chef's success had attracted attention, both from within the prison and from outside forces, including guards and administrators. Every decision mattered, every meal carried weight, and every interaction was a test. In this high-stakes environment, The chef understood one truth. Survival and influence were inseparable, and only those who mastered both could thrive. The legend of the prison chef continued to grow. Tattoos, scars, and whispers marked the men around him, but his influence was invisible yet pervasive. He had become a symbol of strategic mastery, a figure who wielded power through subtlety and precision rather than brute force. And as rivalries intensified, the stage was set for even greater challenges that would test not only his culinary skill but his ability to navigate danger, loyalty, and human ambition. The chef's empire under threat. By the fourth month, the prison chef's influence had reached a level few could imagine. The kitchen was no longer just a place of preparation. It had become a fortress, a command center, a symbol of authority. Every meal served was a statement. Every portion measured was a message. He had allies, respect, and fear woven together in a delicate balance. But with great power came an unavoidable truth. Threats were inevitable. Rival factions, previously content to operate on the periphery, had begun to take coordinated action. Whispers of sabotage escalated into overt threats. The scar-faced inmate who had tested the chef earlier was now rallying a small group, planning to undermine his control over meals and loyalty. Even the tall, tattooed enforcer who had once acknowledged his authority with a nod now questioned his dominance. Power in prison was never static. It was a living, breathing battle, shifting with every move. The first real threat came unexpectedly. A delivery of commissary supplies had been tampered with, and a rival faction deliberately replaced ingredients with spoiled food. The goal was clear: discredit the chef, provoke anger, and incite rebellion. But the chef had anticipated this possibility. Every item entering the kitchen was carefully inspected, from cans of beans to packets of cheese. He identified the sabotage immediately, quietly removing the tainted supplies before any meals were prepared. His calm demeanor masked a growing realization. The stakes were higher now than ever before. Word of the attempted sabotage spread quickly through the block. Rival factions expected disruption and chaos, but instead they witnessed precision, strategy, and resilience. The chef distributed meals with careful attention, subtly rewarding loyal inmates and sending warning signals to those who had acted against him. It was a silent demonstration of power. Attempts to destabilize his empire would not succeed. Fear and respect deepened, and his influence expanded even further. Despite the outward appearance of control, the chef understood that the true danger lay not just in physical threats but in betrayal. Loyalty in prison was often transactional, fragile, and fleeting. Every interaction, every favor granted, had the potential to shift allegiances. He observed, recorded, and assessed who could be trusted, who could be manipulated, and who was plotting. The kitchen had become a surveillance hub as much as a culinary space. Every gesture, every exchange of food, conveyed information and reinforced his authority. Tensions escalated further during a late-night meal preparation. Rival inmates attempted to provoke confrontation, moving aggressively in the kitchen, challenging his authority over distribution. The chef remained composed. He distributed meals strategically, acknowledging allies, denying provocatees, and maintaining the delicate balance of power. One wrong move, one flash of anger, could ignite violence that might spiral out of control. Yet he maneuvered through the tension with skill, turning a potential riot into an opportunity to consolidate influence. The chef's control extended beyond the kitchen walls. Inmates across the block now deferred to his decisions, quietly acknowledging his authority. Minor disputes over bunk space, contraband, or access to communal areas were mediated indirectly through the chef's network. His allies, carefully cultivated over months, acted as extensions of his influence, subtly enforcing order and ensuring loyalty. The chef had transformed the block's social dynamics. Survival, respect, and power were all connected to the meals he prepared. But with expansion came exposure. The chef's prominence attracted attention from guards and prison administrators. While his influence had previously operated under the radar, it was becoming harder to conceal. Any perceived favoritism or manipulation could result in sanctions, confiscation of commissary privileges, or even solitary confinement. He had to navigate not only rival factions but also the institutional scrutiny of the prison system. Every decision carried weight, both visible and invisible. Amid the threats, the chef maintained a strategic focus on alliances. He recognized that true power in the prison environment required both fear and loyalty. Generosity tempered with calculated denial ensured that respect was earned, not assumed. Even minor gestures, such as an extra portion of seasoned rice or a perfectly melted slice of cheese, carried symbolic significance. Every meal became a tool for maintaining balance, managing conflict, and reinforcing hierarchy. Rival factions were persistent, however. The scar-faced leader staged a subtle coup attempt, spreading rumors that the chef had been hoarding commissary items or showing favoritism. The chef countered with precision. He called meetings with trusted allies, distributed meals publicly, and used psychological strategy to expose the dissenters subtly. Those who had attempted subversion found themselves isolated, while loyal allies became more firmly entrenched. Influence was solidified not through intimidation alone, but through calculated social engineering. The stakes reached a peak when the rival factions plotted a coordinated confrontation in the yard, intending to challenge his authority in front of a larger group of inmates. The chef anticipated the move. Leveraging his network, he orchestrated an intervention without physical violence. Meals were timed, seating arrangements subtly adjusted, and allies positioned strategically. When the confrontation occurred, it was diffused quietly, tension replaced by respect, defiance neutralized by carefully managed perception. By the end of the 4th month, the chef's empire had not only survived threats but strengthened under pressure. His influence had become systemic, shaping behavior, loyalty, and the informal power structure across the block. Rival factions had been tested, alliances solidified, and his reputation as a master strategist, both feared and admired, was cemented. Yet, even as he consolidated power, the chef remained acutely aware of the fragility of his position. Every alliance was conditional, every act of loyalty potentially temporary. The prison environment was volatile, and threats could emerge without warning. But through careful strategy, psychological insight, and the subtle manipulation of one of the most valuable commodities in prison, food, he had built an empire that few dared to challenge. The legend of the prison chef continued to grow. Inmates spoke of him in hushed tones, new arrivals were warned, and even seasoned men acknowledged the precision and influence he wielded. He had survived sabotage, confrontation, and betrayal, yet the real test was still to come. The ultimate challenge would demand not only skill and strategy, but resilience, adaptability, and the courage to maintain dominance in a world where power was fleeting, alliances fragile, and survival never guaranteed. Legacy of the prison chef. By the 5th month, the prison chef had become more than a man. He was a symbol. Inmates whispered his name in every corner of the block. Newcomers were quietly instructed on his rules, and rival factions approached the kitchen with measured caution. His empire, built on meals, strategy, and subtle manipulation, was a testament to the power of influence in an environment defined by scarcity and survival. Yet, the chef knew that legend carried risks. With notoriety came scrutiny, from guards, from administrators, and even from inmates who had yet to align. Every move he made had to reinforce control while anticipating betrayal. He had survived sabotage, challenges, and conspiracies, but he understood that true power required constant vigilance. The prison, after all, was a living organism of ambition, fear, and unpredictability. The most formidable challenge arrived quietly. A coalition of rival inmates, emboldened by frustration and envy, began plotting a coordinated attempt to seize control of the kitchen. Their plan was meticulous: disrupt supply chains, intimidate loyal allies, and provoke chaos during meal distribution. For the first time, the chef faced an orchestrated threat on a scale that tested both his tactical skills and psychological insight. Anticipating the move, the chef acted preemptively. He used his network of loyal inmates to gather intelligence, subtly observing shifts in behavior, whispered conversations, and unusual alliances. Every tray he prepared, Every portion he distributed became a tool for influence. He rewarded loyalty and subtly reminded challengers of the consequences of disobedience. The kitchen, once a simple space for cooking, had become the nerve center of a silent battle for dominance. The coalition made its move during a routine dinner. Rival factions attempted to create tension, challenge distribution, and incite confrontation. The chef, calm as ever, executed a plan honed over months of observation and strategy. Loyal allies were strategically positioned, meals were carefully portioned, and subtle psychological maneuvers diffused potential violence. The challenger's attempts to destabilize his empire failed. Respect turned into reluctant admiration. Defiance was neutralized through strategy rather than brute force. This final test reinforced his authority. Inmates understood that control in the block was not won by intimidation alone, but through precision, intelligence, and calculated generosity. The chef's legend grew with every successful maneuver. He had transformed food into power, meals into influence, and loyalty into a system that controlled the social dynamics of the block. Outside the immediate kitchen, the chef's influence extended into nearly every corner of the prison. Disputes were mediated quietly, tensions diffused subtly, and alliances maintained without overt violence. Even the guards noticed the unusual order. Minor conflicts were fewer, morale was subtly influenced, and the informal hierarchy was stabilized. The chef had achieved a rare balance in a world defined by chaos and volatility. But survival in prison is never absolute. While the chef's empire endured, he remained aware that challenges were perpetual. New inmates, changing alliances, and external pressures were constant threats. He continued to observe, calculate, and adapt, ensuring that his influence was not just maintained but evolved. Every plate served, every portion measured, and every gesture reinforced his mastery over the block. In his final weeks of control, the prison chef became a legend. Tattoos, scars, and whispers marked the men around him, but his influence transcended fear. He had created a model of survival through intelligence, strategy, and subtle power. His story spread quietly among inmates, reaching even those in other wings. The kitchen, once a place of necessity, had become a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and dominance. The legacy of the chef was not simply in meals prepared or alliances forged. It was in the invisible threads of power, loyalty, and influence he had woven. Inmates carried stories of his cunning into the yard, into their cells, and beyond, ensuring that the legend would endure long after he was gone. He had shown that in a world governed by scarcity and danger, intelligence, strategy, and subtlety could rival brute strength. The prison chef's story is a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and the pursuit of influence in the most unlikely circumstances. A man who began with scraps of commissary food had risen to a position of unparalleled power in the prison hierarchy. His methods were precise, his alliances calculated, and his presence commanding. In a place where survival often meant violence, he had discovered a different path, one where food became currency, strategy became power, and respect was earned with every measured gesture. Even as he moved on, transferred to another facility or serving his sentence, his impact remained. The kitchen continued to be revered, and his principles subtly shaped the behavior of inmates who followed. The prison chef had transformed not just meals, but the very culture of the block, leaving behind a blueprint of influence and power that would be studied, whispered about, and respected for years to come. In a world defined by fear, violence, and scarcity, one man discovered that power could be wielded with a spoon instead of a sword. The prison chef didn't just feed men. He controlled them, influenced them, and left a legacy that would endure long after the kitchen lights went out. His story reminds us that influence comes in many forms, and survival is about more than strength. In prison, even the smallest acts, a portion of noodles, a slice of cheese, can shape destinies. The legend of the prison chef is proof that in the darkest corners, strategy, intelligence, and courage can turn the ordinary into power and turn survival into empire.